Here's why we think Steelers running back Najee Harris and Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott will have bounce back seasons. It's time for another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com.
And I'm Michelle Magdziuk. I'm a researcher at NFL Network and fantasy analyst at NFL.com.
Welcome to Locked On Fantasy Football. It's your destination to become the smartest fantasy football player in your league. We're part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your fantasy football team every day. I'm also proud to tell you this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Visit underdogfantasy.com or find them in the App Store and sign up with the promo code Locked On to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. All right, Michelle, today we're going to talk about bounce back candidates, players we think that are going to give us the return we expected maybe last season. Some in the industry, the kids like to call it post-hype sleepers potentially, or just guys that were busts in some way or another in relation to their draft values last year that we think are going to pay off this year. So how we're going to do it is we're going to break down the running backs first and get into our wide receiver picks, and then look at a couple quarterbacks each that we like to bounce back. So Michelle, I'll start with you here, and you have two interesting choices here at running back. So reveal your two bounce back running backs here for 2023.
So my first pick is my boy Najee Harris. Listen, I was super high on him last offseason, and he disappointed, right? I mean, he dealt with the foot injury, he had a Liz Frank injury in preseason, and he didn't miss any time, but maybe he should have because it was really bad for the first half of the season. His efficiency was terrible. His fantasy points per game were all bad, right? And then he had a steel plate in a shoe. He gets that out. The Steelers go on week 9 bye. He gets to get fully healthy. The rest of the season, he was pretty solid. His carries per game went way up. His efficiency went up. He was averaging 14.2 fantasy points per game from weeks 10 through 18. I think he's kind of a steal right now at running back 13 because you're getting a guy who's going to get 350 touches, maybe more next season. So I think he's one of the best values and a bounce back player this year. And then AJ Dillon of the Packers, I'm starting to slowly get on board. I know he's not a sexy pick whatsoever, but right now he's going as a running back 32, 88th overall. So you can get him pretty late in your drafts. And this is the thing. So he's not super fun to watch. He doesn't do a whole lot of flashy things, but at the end of last year, he really started to come along, and they were using him near the goal line almost exclusively, especially towards the end of the season. But he had 10 carries inside the 5 last year, while Aaron Jones only had 3, and 6 of those 10 carries came in weeks 15 through 18. He scored 5 rushing touchdowns during that time. So like he did come along quite a bit there towards the end of the season. I don't even remember this, but he averaged 14.5 fantasy points per game from weeks 12 through 18. That's a big chunk of time
that
he was producing. I don't remember him producing. A lot of it came to touchdowns, but I think with Jordan Love there, they're going to, lean heavier on the run. Aaron Jones, of course, will still be involved, but we only have one start from Jordan Love. And in that game, AJ Dillon had 4 receptions for 44 receiving yards. Will that keep up? I don't know, but I think he's a sneaky pick later in the draft.
Yeah, and these two guys also have another thing in common. They have tree trunks for legs. You can't bring them down. They're pretty strong. So we like that, right? You want backs that can hold up and finish in the red zone. And you look at Harris, the blocking has improved. I think Isaac Seumalo is maybe one of the more underrated additions in all of the NFL here. I think he's going to greatly improve the run blocking. The left side is much better, so that's there. You got an offense that's going to commit to him well, as you mentioned, Michelle, to get him the high volume. And there's going to be room for Jaylen Warren too, but they're going to focus a lot on this backfield. Again, we've talked about how Warren is one of the better handcuffs here that you can look at, but I agree with you, Najee, going as a borderline RB1, RB2. I think he could go there as a RB1 and give you those numbers like he did in his rookie season. Now, you look at A.J. Dillon. I agree with you on this one, too. I think last year we thought it was coming, right? Inexperienced receiving core with Aaron Rodgers, that they were going to feed Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon a lot more, not only as runners, but in the passing game. But now you figure it's going to happen more, right? Now you have the inexperienced quarterback and the inexperienced receiving core. So that adds up to get those backs involved. And A.J. Dillon, what I've been impressed with, he is a very good receiver that I don't think gets credit for it. And I think the Packers are comfortable using him there, like you mentioned. And the other thing you look at, he's looking for a contract, right? He doesn't know if he's going to get paid behind Aaron Jones. We know how running backs feel about contracts. So I think he'll be a little bit motivated for that as well. So a lot of good stuff there, Michelle, for your picks. Now, I will offer my couple guys here that you put on your radar here for fantasy football. I have Cam Akers on my list. Now, he really hasn't had that big year, so I don't know if it's hard for him to say he's going to bounce back, but he's going to bounce back from our expectations, right? He was an RB21 right now, according to the half-point PPR rankings, ADP, 55 overall at the position. He had 903 yards from scrimmage and 7 TDs last year, but interesting that he finished as RB34 with only 13 receptions. So that's kind of interesting, right? He didn't play. He wasn't all that healthy. He still was on the board there as a flex play, right? If you look at Cam Akers and look at the last 3 games for Cam Akers, 25 touches, 20 touches, 24 touches. He had 408 scrimmage yards. He had that 3-touchdown game against the Broncos. So Cam Akers can do this, right? If you give him some volume. And this is what the Rams are going to be about, right? They have to lean on the running game. So what I like about the Rams, a lot of their kind of ideas are intact here. Sean McVay is there. They know they need to run the ball, take pressure off Matthew Stafford and the injury and all that. They don't have a lot in the passing game. They got to help their defense a little bit more. That doesn't have the same playmakers behind Aaron Donald. So I think it lines up for the Rams. They know it, like Bill Belichick and the Patriots. Sean McVay's smart. He's going to know this is our best way of winning games this season. We got to run Cam Akers as much as possible. So there's not a lot behind him. You have Kyron Williams. You've got some promise here with the backs. I'm not sure what you're going to get from Zach Evans. So it's lining up well for Cam Akers to have some key touches here and really have a heavy workload, and that finish last season is a good indication. Now, another guy I have a little bit different in the range of A.J. Dillon. He is now at RB35 into ADP, 94th overall. It is Antonio Gibson. This is a different way we're going to get the numbers here. Now, there's a lot of parallels I like here. Number one is that you have J.D. McKissic gone. So when you look at the numbers of Gibson last year, 46 catches on 58 targets, 353 yards, and a couple TDs. McKissic, by the way, 27 catches on 40 targets, another 173 yards. So right there, right, you're at 500 yards and some good numbers there with the receiving totals. And you think he's going to be busier, right? I mean, they want to involve him more in the passing game. He said, I want to be more that hybrid wide receiver that I am and do that. And last year, when you look at his work, RB28. So I think he surprised people maybe with that number in half-point PPR. And you also look that he could have an Austin Eckler receiving role here where it's very him forward and they use him in the red zone, right? I mean, Brian Robinson Jr. is a big dude, not very efficient inside the 10 last year for that size. So when you look at it, what did we get from the previous receiving back? I know you can't count on the touchdowns, but under Eric Bieniemy, Jerick McKinnon wasn't RB21. He had 10 touchdowns. That was a big part of it, and he had 800 receiving yards. But I think Antonio Gibson can have some good touchdowns. I think he can get some work in the early downs as well and some red zone. So those are my two choices here. Different paths to those numbers. One may be a true workhorse, maybe one doing a lot in the passing game. But what do you think of those picks, Michelle?
Listen, so Cam Akers almost made this list, but tomorrow we're going to be talking about guys that are going to have career seasons, only looking at guys entering their 4th season or later. And Cam Akers may be on my list for that one. So yeah. I'm all on board with you there. He just finally was getting used last season, and he showed that he could be a good fantasy asset when he actually gets the volume. Antonio Gibson, listen, I feel like we've been waiting forever for this dude. We keep saying every year, this is his year. Like, he's going to be used more as a receiver this year. No, it's going to happen this year. If they use him as a receiver, awesome. Like, he has the talent to do it. And if he finally does get those targets, he will be a steal in fantasy. I have to see it before I believe it. I'm sick of buying in on Antonio Gibson. I'm over it, but I get what you're saying with him. All right. Before we get into our next segment, we're going to be talking about bounce back wide receivers. I got some goodies to give you for that one. But before we do that, we got to have a little chat. August is here, and you know what that means? The official start of fantasy football drafting month. Get championship ready for your home league by trying out Best Ball and Underdog Fantasy. All you do is one live snake draft, no waivers, no trades. Underdog sets your best lineup every week. It's personally my favorite way to do mock drafts. It really just helps you prepare for your home leagues because you're doing drafts with people who have an actual stake in the team that they draft, and you're getting real accurate ADP of where all these players are actually being drafted. You can try it out with Underdog's Best Ball Mania Tournament. The largest fantasy football contest of all time is back and even bigger, with $15 million of total prizes up for grabs, including an absurd $3 million going to the winner. Last year, the winner drafted their team in July, so don't wait around. Visit UnderdogFantasy.com or find them in the App Store and sign up with promo code LOCKEDON to get your first deposit doubled up to $100. That's Underdog Fantasy promo code LOCKEDON. All right, Vinny. It's bounce back wide receiver times. I was shocked by my own picks. I love this time of the year because I just start getting warmer and warmer on guys. I went first with my running backs, so I think I want to hear about your wide receivers before I get into mine.
Yeah, this is a guy that you mentioned first. I'll start with him. Mike Williams. He's going now as wide receiver 30 at ADP, 70th overall. You look at it 2021, he had a big year, right? He finished as wide receiver 11 just a couple years ago. In average scoring last year, he was actually wide receiver 23, and he had 7 double-digit fantasy points in 12 of his healthy games where he's fully healthy, was able to produce there. So he's still a key target for what they want to do, and I like the Kellen Moore offense. We've heard the raves about Justin Herbert, and you've talked about how you love Herbert this year, and I do like him in the Kellen Moore offense because they're going to open it up, throw the ball downfield a little bit more. That helps Mike Williams. He's a good red zone target, we know, with his body. So, again, touchdowns tend to go up and down for wide receivers, but Mike Williams is kind of built to score touchdowns, right? He's kind of the always poor man's Mike Evans, right? I wish he would do a little bit more and stay healthy, but he has that type of body, right? They stretch the field with him. They use him in the red zone when needed because he can go up and get the ball over people. So that's what I like about Mike Williams. He has a great quarterback here, good situation. I think when we look at Keenan Allen versus Mike Williams, I think Quentin Johnson is going to hurt Keenan Allen a little bit more because he's older, he's slowing down. Mike Williams is still in his prime here and can make some plays. So I like Williams as a key target for Justin Herbert. My other pick here is Marquise Hollywood Brown at wide receiver 34 ADP, 83rd overall. He actually was a wide receiver 23 when he was in Baltimore in 2021 overall. Last year, he was wide receiver 32 in average scoring. So when you look at that, a little bit of a downgrade from where he was in terms of being healthy last year. He's got all the speed and quickness metrics that you're looking for. He's a first-round pick. We know that. And he's actually done better than we expected with the Cardinals. And look, he's going to have to wait to get his boy Kyler Murray back probably on the field. But you look at it on this team, 217 vacated targets. 96 of them are DeAndre Hopkins. And we know Marquise Brown has to be the guy, right? At some point, Zach Ertz is banged up. You got Rondale Moore. We'll try to figure that one out to see what you're going to get as a complimentary receiver. But they're going to have to throw to Marquise Brown. And what I like is that Clayton Tune, the quarterback that could start for them, the rookie out of Houston, might be a necessity here. It's past David Blau. He's a guy that has a big downfield arm, and he's going to push it there with Marquise Brown. There's not much here that is going to hold him back. They're going to target him a ton here no matter what. So he's my second pick. My third pick has been Mr. Reliable for me in a lot of different teams. This is now his fifth team, if you're keeping track here with Brandon Cooks. For those of you playing Immaculate Grid, keep that in mind. He was wide receiver 40 on the rankings that we just saw, 97th there. So that's his ADP. That's really low, right? He's going outside of the wide receiver threes. He was only wide receiver 55 last year, but when you look at the average scoring in half-point PPR, he was 42. And it's an ideal situation because you have 197 vacated targets here with the Cowboys. 89 of those were Dalton Schultz. I think they'll pivot to more 11 personnel with Michael Gallup and CeeDee Lamb and using Brandon Cooks. And Cooks has had a great camp. By the way, there's also 74 vacated targets sneaky for Noah Brown, who actually goes to Texans along with Dalton Schultz. So some of the targets go that way. Brandon Cooks comes in and takes those Texans targets here with the Cowboys. So I love Brandon Cooks because he's just a technician, right? He runs great routes. He catches passes. He tends to have big years with his team early, right? He did it with the Saints, Patriots, Rams, Texans. It happens early. He fades a little bit if the offense changes, but I like his role in this offense replacing Dalton Schultz. Those are my picks. What do you think? And then you can get into yours, Michelle.
So I've noticed there's a trend here where your bounce back players are all guys I think are going to have career seasons next year. Besides Brandon Cooks, I don't think will have a career year because, CeeDee Lamb is the wide receiver one, but I do think he has a nice bounce back year. He's been playing with Davis Mills for the last 2 years and he was over it. Like he was over playing for the Texans last year. He didn't want any part of these terrible targets he was getting. So yes, he gets a huge upgrade at quarterback. And yeah, CeeDee Lamb will still be the number one wide receiver, get a ton of targets. But I do think Dak and Brandon Cooks will connect on a lot of deep balls, and it'll be a fun connection to watch. Marquise Brown, it all comes down to how terrible are the Cardinals' backup quarterbacks? Can Colt McCoy or Clayton Tune just be okay? No one's expecting much, but can you just accurately target a wide receiver at times? And if you can, Marquise Brown is going to be a steal in PPR leagues for sure. Like he was great last year without DeAndre Hopkins for those first 6 weeks, not efficiency wise, but in targets and in PPR points, he was. And that's all we need. That's all we need from him. And Mike Williams, you already know he's my boy. I love Justin Herbert this year so much. And I think those two will be fantastic together. I'm moving on to my guy, my first one. It's another huge target in this in the NFL, and it's DK Metcalf. He's right now sitting at wide receiver 15 ADP, 33 overall. It's weird. He had a weird year last year. He had a career high 141 targets. If you would have told me he was getting that, I mean, you would have thought he did absolutely amazing in fantasy, but only put up 1,048 yards and 6 touchdowns. It was really the 6 touchdowns that was so different for him, but he led the NFL last year with 22 end zone targets, 3 more than anyone else. He just only caught 5 of them. I don't think that stands this year, right? Like I think he still gets those end zone targets and he's going to come down with more of them. And also he doesn't need 141 targets to be successful. His yards per reception went way down last year. They were kind of utilizing him in a different way than they have in the past. But now with Jackson Smith-Njigba there, he can kind of be used for those shorter and immediate receptions while they let DK Metcalf kind of be that deeper threat again. So I could see his yards going up even though his targets should come down. So I think he has a nice bounce back week or year. And then I realize I'm being a homer in this podcast quite a bit here because I have Deontay Johnson as my second bounce back player. He can't go 0 touchdowns again this year. I mean, he just can't, right? He's had so many targets over the last 3 years, 147 targets last year, 0 touchdowns. It's just like impossible. It's impossible, but he did it. But Johnson has had the 5th most targets in the NFL over the last 3 seasons. He's behind only Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Justin Jefferson, and Tyreek Hill. He is one of the best route runners in the league. He is truly great at getting open and separating. It's just he's been stuck in a bad offense with a rookie quarterback last year. He's still stuck with Matt Canada, but I do think Kenny Pickett's going to take a step up. And Deontay Johnson was tied for the 9th most end zone targets last season at 11. That turned into 0 touchdowns. That's not going to happen again. I think he bounces back. He had the most red zone targets on the team last year, most end zone targets on the team. He's still the team's wide receiver 1, and he will bounce back this year. And then my last one is Gabe Davis for the Bills. Everyone was super hyped on him last year, so he's the perfect post-hype sleeper because he disappointed, and now everyone wants nothing to do with him. But from weeks 1 through 10, prior to Josh Allen getting injured, he was on pace for 1,156 yards and 11 touchdowns. He just fell off the face of the earth the second half of the season. But so did Stephon Diggs quite a bit from what he was pacing. So did Josh Allen from what he was pacing. That whole offense fell off in the second half of the season as soon as Allen suffered that pretty serious elbow injury. So if we're going to say Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs are going to come back and be what they used to be, then we have to say Gabe Davis has a pretty good shot of coming back as well. And he's still the clear-cut wide receiver 2 there. Davis has had 24 red zone targets over the last 2 seasons, the 5th most in the NFL. Like, you're playing with one of the best quarterbacks in the league. You shouldn't be able to draft this guy in the 9th, 10th round. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, your picks are really solid, Michelle. I agree with 2 of them wholeheartedly here. I think when you look at Deontay Johnson, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's going to happen. I think with Gabe Davis, the value is just so good right now, and an offense is going to throw the ball downfield. Now, I do have a mild concern with DK Metcalf, and that's the fact that I think he's a very inefficient receiver, and this is part of the numbers that struggle with, right? He has the volume, he has the opportunity. Where's the execution, DK? Like, catch the ball, like, do it well. It's not like Geno Smith was bad last year, right? He was putting the ball in good spots here. Tyler Lockett is always the guy, right? Always super efficient, whether it was with Russell Wilson or Geno Smith, he's always maximizing. I'm a little concerned there that DK, I think maybe not getting the opportunities. And look, I think he can score a bunch of touchdowns, and that's fine, right? He's built to score touchdowns. He's got that Mike Williams, Mike Evans type kind of skill set, stretch the field, make some big plays, get in the red zone. So I do like that number. So I think he's just a little touchdown dependent, but that's okay. Some of those wide receivers are touchdown dependent. It's okay to be that way if you've got the body to score the touchdown. So I think it a little hinges on that a little bit, but otherwise I think Metcalf, very good choice here for a bounce back candidate. Now, we've talked about wide receivers. We've talked about running backs. That means we're going to look at bounce backs at quarterbacks. We'll have 2 picks each for you. Michelle will have 2. I will have 2. Thanks again for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. And everydayers, that's you. Thanks so much for listening all 5 days a week. We bring it to you to help you dominate your draft prep, and then all season long to make the right lineup decisions. Now, tomorrow on the show, as Michelle hinted at, we're going to look at career year players. These are players going into year 4 or later that we think will have the best statistical seasons potentially of their career and excited about. So we have some big names there to talk about as well, maybe some overlap with today's show, which is great. That means you'll be doubly invested in some of the players we're talking about today. So looking forward to breaking that down for you to close the week on Locked On Fantasy Football. All right, Michelle, it is time to reveal our bounce back quarterback choices here in 2023 for fantasy. I'll let you go first on this one. You have 2 names that have been polarizing, but they're names that we're also relying upon a lot in fantasy.
Yeah, so Russell Wilson is being thrown into, I don't know, the dumpster this offseason because of last year. Everyone was so hyped on him going to the Broncos and, letting Russ cook, right? That was the whole thing. Like, let him pass more. And it was disastrous. It was so bad, right? And he was cringy all year long. I get it. But he's being too hated on this year. Quarterback 18. I think he has a great bounce back year. Over the 3 seasons prior to 2022, he was averaging 20.2 points per game in fantasy, which was the quarterback 9 over that span of time. And I all the reports coming out in camp right now is that Sean Payton is making Russell Wilson and that offense look so much better. And why I believe it is because Sean Payton has history of coming onto a team that was one of the absolute worst in the league before he got there. I mean, before he became the Saints head coach in 2006, the 2005 Saints ranked 31st in points per game, 30th in quarterback passer rating, 31st in giveaways. They were a terrible offense overall. And then the very first season under Sean Payton, the 2006 Saints were the number 1 total offense, and they went to the NFC Championship. I'm not saying the Broncos are going to go to the AFC Championship, but I do think Sean Payton is going to drastically fix this offense in year 1. And he can't do that unless Russell Wilson's good. Like, that's not going to happen unless he gets the best play out of Russell Wilson. But we know he's talented. Like, that talent didn't just disappear in 1 year. And apparently he's lost weight and he's able to get around better. I think Russell Wilson is a steal, and I think he's a huge bounce back. He could even be a comeback player of the year if he's a candidate. I would have to look at the odds. He should be, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, it was so bad last year. He's going to come back from his own adversity. I don't get that necessarily with the comeback player of the year, but That's part of it. Your other choice is interesting as well, a little bit higher on the board, and another guy
Dak.
that is also working in the new offense this year.
Yeah, so Dak Prescott. Listen, I feel like we forget that he broke his thumb on his throwing hand in week 1. Like, yeah, he missed the 5 games and he came back, but he breaking your thumb on your throwing hand, that seems pretty significant. So that may have everyone's like, "Oh, he's been throwing so many interceptions or blah 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 blah. It wasn't the greatest year for him." Well, the team ran 1 gazillion times. They had 531 rushing attempts when the year prior they were at 473. Before that 430, before that 449. So that jump to 531 is just a huge outlier, in my opinion. And they don't have the personnel in this offense to run the ball 531 times. Tony Pollard can't handle that all by himself. And they really don't have much behind him that they're going to trust handing the ball off to. So I know that Mike McCarthy wants to be a running team, but they're going to have to figure out other ways to get this done. I think Dak Prescott will play it safer, but he should be much better this year. So yeah, last year he was only the quarterback 12 in points per game. He was a quarterback 7 in 2021, quarterback 1 overall before his injury in 2020, quarterback 2 in 2019. So it's not like we haven't seen insane upside from him. And all the touchdowns were just going to the running backs last year. 22 rushing touchdowns by the Cowboys. Again, I don't see that happening with the personnel they have. I love Tony Pollard, but I don't think he's getting 22 rushing touchdowns or even coming close to that. So I see Dak Prescott, he has all these weapons with CD, with Brandon Cooks, with Michael Gallup being another year removed from ACL. He has one of the best offenses around him. And as long as Mike McCarthy doesn't just be the worst play caller of all time, like just be adequate, I think Dak's going to have a nice bounce back season and the Cowboys should have a really good year.
Yeah, I do like the potential of Dak, and one thing I think that can come into play here, I don't think the efficiency will be better. We don't necessarily need stretching the field and having these showy plays downfield. Efficiency, get the ball out quickly, execute in the red zone, and use your legs, Wilson and Prescott. Come
Yeah.
on, you guys are mobile. Like, don't refuse to do it. I mean, Russ, you do this. I mean, when he had his best fantasy years, he was running just a little bit. You don't need to. No one knows you're a running quarterback right now. Everyone says you're a passing quarterback. We get it. You proved yourself over and over again. It's okay to run a little bit. If what's available and you can make some plays, do it. And Dak, again, was a guy that scored quite a bit as the rusher. So I think that will come back with both of them and that'll raise their floor. That's what we're looking for. Their ceiling might be limited, but look at where they're going, right? You're not expecting a massive ceiling. You're not going after these guys saying, I'm expecting a QB1 in terms of overall scoring. You're just asking for a starter every week, right? That's going to be consistent and put up your numbers based on where they're going. So you have to look at the players in relation to their expectations. Now, last year we thought, oh, Wilson could break into the top 5. If you say that this year, you're going to be disappointed. But if you say he's going to maybe crack the top 12, yeah, you'll be confident there. Dak Prescott cracking the top 8, yeah, you'll be happy with that value. So that's one thing. Again, we talked about value in relation to where they're going on the board. And here's a couple guys I have now. I don't know how much value you're going to get in the first guy that I'm going to mention, Michelle, but I wanted to talk about him a little bit. So that's why selfishly I put him on the list was Lamar Jackson here at QB4 in ADP 33rd overall. That's pretty high, right? In the 3rd round, but we know it's a little inflated because a lot of drafters go for quarterbacks early. Last year, he was QB 14 because of the injuries, but in reality, he was QB5 when you look at the average scoring. So when he was on the field, he was right up there with those elite quarterbacks, and that's where he's going right now, right? QB4, QB5. I looked at it last year. I did some math, Michelle. Like, not only was it a QB5 average scoring for him, but I added up what Tyler Huntley and, yes, Anthony Brown did last year. They had 330 fantasy points combined as a quarterback group with only 23 passing TD, or really combined TDs, actually, I should say, because there was not a lot of scoring on the ground from Lamar Jackson. So 23 combined TDs, that was good for 5th also. So their composite quarterback production, however you look at it with the Ravens, you had a QB5, whether it's Lamar Jackson or as a group. So what does that tell me? This offense is special, right? There is potential for the upside to be here with the passing game, maybe being emphasized a little bit more. Jackson's touchdowns we know can go up as well. So there's room to grow in so many areas for a player that's established and has won MVP before. So I do like that a lot with Lamar Jackson. So again, he's one of those candidates where I look at, okay, he's QB4, but is there a real shot he could finish as the top scoring fantasy QB overall? Yeah, it can happen again
Yes.
for the second time in his career. And Deshaun Watson is the other guy I'm looking at in that range, right? With Wilson, with Prescott. That range, we're not sure about these guys. Where am I going to get bounce back? Am I going to get enough? Well, right now he's going to QB 10. He's at 81st overall. Last year, in terms of average scoring, we have to look at that because he was suspended for 11 games. QB 23 in that, QB 35 overall. So when you look at that, yeah, 23. So you had a still almost a decent QB2, right? Even when he was terrible and he didn't play last year. So I look at him, okay, are you looking for Deshaun Watson to be great here? That might be hard to expect, right? I mean, we're not sure that Texans form is there. We know it's in the back of our heads that that's how special he could be, but I'm just looking for him to be in the top 12. I may not target him there at that spot at the ADP, but I think he can finish in the top 12 for sure. And he's got the high rushing floor. And again, I'm not exactly sure what you're going to get from him as a passer in year 2, complete year with Kevin Stefanski. It is still a run-heavy offense, but I still think the floor is there for him to produce. As a guy, look, he may not do much better than where he's going. You might actually get him a little later, right? You got to take advantage of that. Some people might be off of Watson just like Wilson or Prescott because they disappointed last year. So a lot of these guys, yeah, their ADP is here, but in a lot of leagues that don't have maybe shrewd players, right, these guys will be on the board later. So you can look at that. So again, Jackson for the ceiling, I think Watson for the floor. That's the best way I can look at it, Michelle.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to bring up Lamar here. It's not about like, is he a great value? It's if you're going to spend a quarterback 4 pick, will he bounce back? And that's what you need, right? And I think the
Yeah.
biggest question with Lamar is, will he stay healthy? I mean, he's missed 5 games each of the last 2 seasons, and he needs to stay healthy. And I am a little bit worried about the OC change. I know everyone's really excited that they will be passing more. I don't necessarily know if that's what we want for fantasy. And then Deshaun Watson, he has all the weapons, right? He has all the weapons he needs. He's very talented. He should 100,000% bounce back. And if he doesn't, then the Browns are kind of screwed with that contract they gave him. One last question here to end the show. So Dak Prescott and Deshaun Watson are basically going back to back in drafts. Which one would you rather take if you're sitting there on the board and they're both available?
Well, based on what I said earlier about Watson on the floor, I think Dak actually might have the higher ceiling here. So I think they both have a decent floor. So I'm going to go for the ceiling there. And I feel comfortable with Dak. I've had him on a lot of teams where I've been able to win. I've not been much in the Watson business and found different ways to go at quarterback. I just think Dak is a little safer, if that makes sense, because we know what we're going to get. We know what type of player he is when he's on and he's healthy. So that's how I would go specifically. If I'm looking for kind of big upside, I'm not going necessarily for this tier. So I'm just going for guys that can start and be solid here. So I do have a player I like over both of these guys, but we can talk about him in the career year that we're looking at tomorrow. So looking forward to that show, Michelle. Definitely. I want to see what your picks are. These are just going to be fun because we can say these guys can dominate and be league winners for you. So we'll get into that. Those are players going into year 4 that can at least that are going to be veterans that have big years. So looking forward to that. Thanks again for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We are Locked On Fantasy Football, your destination to become the smartest fantasy football player in your league. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. For Locked On Fantasy Football, this has been Vinnie Iyer.
And I'm Michelle Magdziuk. Bye, y'all.